Hi everyone, welcome to my hopefully fairly quick lecture video on executive summaries, letters of transmittal, and table of contents. So that is the front and back matter of what is going to go into your final paper. If you are doing a blog post, I guess it's not a paper, it's a blog post, but much of this is going to be still relevant for those of you doing magazine articles, blog posts, and different formats. So let's start with the letter of transmittal. All of you need some kind of letter of transmittal as part of your final research project. So what is this thing? Let's say you're writing a proposal or recommendation report for an audience in industry or academia or something like that, and you're going to send it to them. You're attaching it to an email. You wouldn't just send a blank email, right? You would say something. You would introduce yourself, tell them a little bit about who you are, or if they know who you are and they're expecting this report, you might remind them of when you met about it or what it was going to be about or when you proposed it to them. A kind of brief, here's who I am and here's a little bit about what this is. So in the old days, it was a letter of transmittal. You would do this like a letter. It would be like, here's my proposal. And then you would lay the letter of transmittal on top, so it might be paper clipped or something. It wasn't even really stapled to it, and they'd go in an envelope together, and that would end up on the desk of someone. So now we have email. So what the letter of transmittal typically is now is the body of the email that you send when you attach this report. It's addressed to your final audience. It is whatever tone makes sense for that audience. So let's say you're writing a guide for your teammates for your varsity sport. They're your peers. You can have a very peer tone about it, dear team. And then, it's okay to use a very casual, conversational, friendly tone. If you are submitting this to a government official of some sort, they don't know who you are, you're going to need a very professional tone, kind of like a cover letter, introducing yourself, talking about what this is, giving them a little bit of context. Generally speaking, you don't want the letter of transmittal to be longer than a page. This isn't, giving away the whole paper. It's basically giving them enough to say, here's who I am, and you should read this. So it's a little bit of a sales pitch in that regard because you want them to read it. If it's your PI and you know them, then, it might just be a tiny little paragraph. It might not be many sentences at all. Thank you for meeting me about this a couple weeks ago. I'm really glad to have this done for you. I look forward to your feedback. It could be very, very simple, and that's fine. So all of you need some kind of letter transmittal. I will give you one caveat. If you are doing a magazine article or like a blog post, so like an online magazine article, you can do an about the author section, and that will count as your letter of transmittal. So it might be at the end or it might be at the beginning. It could be addressed to your readers or not, but an about the author section talking about who you are and why you're writing this, that would be in place of a letter of transmittal, fine as far as this assignment goes. So you can decide if you're doing a magazine article or blog post, whether you want to do a letter of transmittal or not, whether you want to do it as an about the author instead. Everyone else should have a letter of transmittal. Those of you doing an academic journal article, you might think about the letter you would send while submitting this to the journal, maybe the letter to your PI, or maybe just a letter to your readers. So any of those would be completely fine for the letter of transmittal for a journal article. It's going to be maybe a little bit more formal for some of the other types of reports. But do make sure you have a letter of transmittal. You can't get an A on the final research project without a letter of transmittal or an about the author section. So that's an essential piece of this. The second essential piece I want to talk to you about is the executive summary or the abstract. There's a bit of a split here. Those of you who are doing magazine articles or blog posts don't need an executive summary or an abstract, but still listen to this because it's going to be useful information when you do have to write a report of some sort when you're in your first job or something like that. So an executive summary is actually a really important piece of of a document. And here's what it is. This sounds a little crazy, but it's in the beginning of your project, your proposal, your recommendation report, and it gives away everything. It's a summary, like in the truest sense of the word. So you know this a little bit with abstracts. You've read journal articles where you read the abstract and it does give away the results. We found whatever, and our measurement was 1.2 times better than previously done, or something like that. It gives us the punchline, but abstracts are kind of a lot shorter, they're a lot more condensed, and that's pretty typical of academia. So if you're doing an academic article, like you're doing something for your PI, scientific research report, if you're doing a journal article for an academic journal, you'll have an abstract. The rest of you who are doing like a recommendation report, a business plan, a feasibility study, proposal, for all of those, you will need an executive summary. So what is this exactly? And why do I need it? Why would I want to summarize everything about my paper before they've even read it? So here's my thought about it. It's called the executive summary. You may not remember this because I'm way older, but there used to be these things called Cliff's Notes. I think there's websites that do this, maybe Spark Notes or something like that. Wikipedia in some sense. But what Cliff's Notes were, they were these little booklets you could buy for like $2.99 back then. And they looked like a bumblebee. They were yellow and black stripes. So it was this really bold cover. There were these little maybe 16-page booklets or 32 or something, but they're very short little things, staple bound. And they would tell you all the key features you needed to know about a book so that you could not read the book in your high school class. You could just read the Cliff's Notes and you'd be able to do well on the test and maybe take a crack at writing the paper. So yeah, they used to sell these. They used to have like a wire rack in the bookstore full of them. Hamlet, Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice, Great Expectations, anything you might read in high school, they would have a little Cliff's Notes for it. And then if you said, I don't really want to read Hamlet, you would pick up the Cliff's Notes and you would read that instead. It would give you all the main characters that you need to know about, all the main plot points, some of the key features of, maybe the key metaphors or things like that your English teacher might ask you about. So I think some of you have, maybe this wasn't as much around when you were in high school either, but Spark Notes, I know, is a website that does that sort of thing. I flipped through Cliff's Notes a couple times in high school and found that they were not the best summaries after all. That the easiest thing to do would just be to read the book. But I'm a reader, so that was fairly easy for me. The Cliff's Notes, though, the spirit behind them is what your executive summary is all about. It's so that your boss's boss can very quickly read this 1-page thing or 1.5-page thing and then go into the meeting and pretend they read the whole paper. All 20 pages or all 15 pages or all 10 pages, whatever your document is. It's giving your boss and your boss's boss a chance to look smart, which is always a good idea, right? On the front end, though, sometimes, let's say you're writing grant proposals for, an organization. You're trying to get a grant. Often what they'll do is they'll use the executive summaries to weed out for round 2. So instead of reading, let's say there's 1,000 submissions, instead of reading all 1,000 submissions, they'll read 1,000 executive summaries. And based on the summaries, they'll narrow it down to a couple hundred that they actually want to read. My husband was doing startup stuff a number of years ago, and he participated in the Olin Cup competition at WashU through the Scandalaris Center, and I helped him out with that. And their round 1 didn't even include submitting a business plan. It only included submitting the executive summary. They only wanted to see that to start with, to decide who their finalists were. You had to do a pitch and all that too. But they were making that decision based on a much shorter document and not the big fat one. And so this is a really quick way to give them all the key points, maybe without all the analysis you put into it. And then you have all of that to back it up as your report itself. So one thing about the executive summary to keep in mind is it's actually a separate document. Like, yes, it's in this same document, but it should be able to be read as a separate document. Like, someone should be able to read only it and be able to have a complete picture of what your paper is all about. And on the flip side of that, people should be able to read your paper without the executive summary, and it should be a complete document. So the executive summary is not the introduction. It's different. I would suggest, if it's hard to wrap your brain around that, write them separately. Save them as 2 separate Word documents, and in the end, you can combine them. But really think about them separately. Does that mean that there's going to be some of the same language in the summary and the paper? Absolutely. You might pull the most salient or important sentences from each section. You can include anything you want in an executive summary. If a table communicates what you're looking to communicate better than text, you might include a table. You might include key points as bullet points instead of a paragraph. You might decide to do an infographic. It doesn't matter. Any of that is completely fair game. It's not like an abstract for academia where they have a set format. Oh, we want 200 words or less, and it's one single paragraph and it's only text. With an executive summary, you can invent what you think it should look like. So it could be all text, but it could incorporate other elements as well. You could incorporate a table. You could bring in a graph if it's the graph that pulls everything together. So all of that is fair game for your executive summary. Now, what about length? For the executive summary, it's not a very specific rule. It's anecdotal, but I think it works really well for something in the sort of the range of pages that's maybe between 5 and 30 pages. So, a sort of short to medium report. The executive summary should be no more than about 10% the length of the paper. So if you, let's say we're writing something very short for your boss and it's 5 pages, just summarize it in a paragraph, like a little half-page summary. If you are doing this final research project and let's say you've got 12 pages, a 1-page summary would be about right. With 8 pages, a 1-page summary would be about right. So, it's okay. I'm not going to nickel and dime you on, really, you should have gone with 4/5 of a page if you're writing an 8-page paper. 1 page is fine. But if you go beyond a page for the summary and your paper's 8 pages long, that's getting really meaty. You're including a lot of details at that point. If you were writing something that's 20 pages, then a 2-page summary is totally fine. I think as it gets to 30 pages, you'll probably do something that's 30 pages with a team of yours somewhere along the line in your career. As it gets to 30 pages, a 3-page summary is fine. But beyond that, I think 3 is a really good maximum to consider. So even if you have some 100-page beast of a business plan, how do you boil it down to 3 pages? And in that case, it might be 3 pages single-spaced or something. It might be 3 physical pages. But really kind of think about boiling it down so that it is actually an easy summary to read. Something that's 10 pages is not an easy summary to read. So you might say, 10 pages is, 10% of 100 pages, but I think that percentage breaks down if you're looking at really, really long documents. You'll still want to keep it short. For myself, my general rule of thumb is 1 to 2 pages, and I allow myself to single space them, depending on what I'm working on. And I have done freelance projects for companies where there's one where it was this absolute beast of a business plan with a marketing plan, attached and some other thing attached. And I think it ended up being 150 pages, which is way too long, by the way. But they had me write the summary and I was able to boil it down to 3 pages, which actually then says that 150 pages was way too long. Typically, if you do stuff like business plans or marketing plans, those are in the 20 to 25 range as you sort of move along and see those. So yeah, the executive summary is just this short thing. And it gives away the punchline. It gives away the results. It gives away the conclusions, the recommendations you made. It's all the key points. So that needs to be a part of what you do. You need a summary and summary or an abstract, unless you're writing a magazine article or like a blog post. For those particular formats, you wouldn't need that. So then some of you are going to need table of contents. So that's the third thing I'm here to talk to you about. The table of contents, if you haven't seen one recently, you can take a look at a couple of the papers on Canvas, the example papers, and they'll give you a really good idea how to do table of contents. Microsoft Word has a really wonderful auto-generate table of contents feature. And I love it. And when I discovered it in probably 2008 or 2009, I thought, this has been around and I didn't know it. My life was so much easier. So I would suggest exploring that. What you have to do, it's a little bit clunky. You have to enable heading styles. And then every time you're doing a section heading, you designate it that heading style. And then you type in that section heading. Then you've got all your section headings. You can move to the beginning of the document and tell Word to generate a table of contents, and boom, it's there for you. All the page numbers are correct. Everything's good to go. And you can update that as you go along. So if you change section titles and you end up with more pages, or the page numbers start switching around, you can just have the table of contents update, and all of that will be reflected in there, which is really cool. So I would definitely suggest doing that. A table of contents basically shows you where the main sections are in the paper. You'll need one for everything but like a magazine article, a journal article, or a blog post. And some blog posts, they decide to put a little table of contents, but instead of page numbers, it's hyperlinks. It'll jump you down to the section you're looking for. With a magazine article or a journal article, the table of contents for that would actually be at the beginning of the magazine itself. So yours is like one chapter in a longer piece, and that's true of a journal article as well. But if you're writing a report, a business plan, a recommendation report, a feasibility study, proposal, you will need a table of contents. And that includes page numbers. So you need page numbers in your table of contents. It's not just an outline. It actually tells people, here's where I can flip if I'm interested in just flipping over the budget section. I don't want to see anything else. Or let me just jump to the recommendation. Let's see what it is. It makes it very easy to flip to that. So you do need page numbers. And then you also need page numbers on the pages, right? So I've had students forget that. They do the nice table of contents. It's got page numbers. I go to flip to something and I go, wait a second, there's no page numbers on the pages. So don't forget that little piece either. So that was just kind of a quick explanation of these three things. Executive summary, letter transmittal, table of contents. Here's who needs what. You all need something that counts as a letter of transmittal, and an about the author section would be okay in a magazine article or a blog post. And so that would be fine for that format. The rest of you will need some kind of letter of transmittal. You need an executive summary or an abstract in everything but a blog post or a magazine article. And finally, with table of contents, you won't need it in a magazine article or blog post or a journal article. So those are the pieces that are important to remember. And I will answer any questions you have during class about the gritty details of this, but I'm happy to talk to you about it. Or if you have questions about, oh, is this appropriate for an abstract or is this appropriate for an executive summary, I can definitely do that. So I can tell you a little bit about that or whatever. I think taking a look at some of the examples on Canvas would be really excellent. They do a great job of these. So thanks for listening, and have a great day.